Hello friend, welcome to Science for Sleep. Tonight, we're going to spend some time with one of the most familiar nutrients in the world. It appears in oranges, lemons, berries, juices, and vegetables so often that most people hear its name long before they ever learn much about it. Vitamin C feels bright, fresh, and simple. But behind that familiar name is a much longer and more interesting story. And before we continue, if you enjoy slow, relaxing science like this, feel free to subscribe and join us here at Science for Sleep. This channel is made to help you unwind, get comfortable, and drift off while learning about the quiet wonders of the world. So settle in, get cozy, and let tonight's story about vitamin C unfold slowly around you. By the end of tonight, you'll have a gentle understanding of what vitamin C is, why human beings need it, how it quietly supports the body, and how this small nutrient became part of food, history, travel, and daily life all over the world. Vitamin C has a special place in the human imagination. Many nutrients stay hidden in the background. People may eat them without ever thinking about them at all. But vitamin C is different. Children hear about it early. Adults recognize it easily. It appears on food labels, in health products, and in everyday conversation. Even people who know almost nothing about nutrition usually know that oranges and vitamin C belong together. That alone is a little unusual. And the more you look at vitamin C, the more surprising it becomes. For example, human beings cannot make their own vitamin C. Many animals can produce it inside their bodies, but we cannot. That means this common nutrient is not just helpful to us. It is something we must keep getting from the outside world, again and again through food. Vitamin C also helps solve one of the great health mysteries of the past. For centuries, people suffered terribly on long sea voyages when fresh foods disappeared from their diets. Sailors grew weak, their gums became damaged, their bodies struggled to heal, and many died from a condition that later became known as scurvy. The answer to that mystery turned out to be tied to the same nutrient many people now connect with a simple glass of orange juice. It also turns out that oranges are only part of the story. Vitamin C is famous because of citrus, but it lives in many other foods too. Some fruits are rich in it, of course, but so are many vegetables. In some cases, vegetables that do not get much attention for vitamin C can contain even more than the foods most people think of first. And then there is the body itself. Vitamin C is not a nutrient that simply floats around doing nothing until someone catches a cold and starts thinking about it. It is involved in the quiet work of keeping the body together. It helps support collagen, one of the important materials that gives structure to skin, blood vessels, gums, and connective tissues. In that sense, vitamin C is part of the body's hidden maintenance system. It helps support strength, repair, and balance in ways most people never notice unless something begins to go wrong. Even its personality as a nutrient is interesting. Vitamin C is delicate. Time can reduce it. Heat can reduce it. Storage can reduce it. A fresh fruit just picked from a tree or a pepper sliced on a cutting board is not exactly the same. Nutritionally, as something that has sat for a long time, been boiled for too long, or traveled far from where it was grown. So vitamin C is not only a story about food. It is also a story about freshness, distance, time, and change. When you put all of that together, vitamin C begins to feel much larger than its name suggests. It is a molecule tied to ships and gardens, to plants and people, to kitchens and chemistry, to wounds and healing, to history and everyday meals. It is one of those quiet things that seem small at first, then grows larger and larger the longer you sit with it. And perhaps that is part of what makes it such a pleasant subject for tonight. It is bright, but not loud. Familiar, but not shallow. Common, but not unimportant. So as we settle in, we can let the subject open slowly. A vitamin that many people treat as a simple fact of life turns out to carry questions about evolution, survival, food, and the hidden work of the human body. What kind of nutrient becomes so familiar that nearly everyone knows its name, yet still remains mysterious underneath it? To begin answering that, it helps to start with one of the strangest facts of all. Human beings need vitamin C, but unlike many other animals, we cannot make it for ourselves. For something so familiar, vitamin C begins with a very unusual truth. Human beings cannot make it for themselves. That may not sound surprising at first. After all, most people do not imagine the body quietly making vitamins in the background. But in the case of vitamin C, many other animals really can do exactly that. Their bodies are able to build it on their own from other compounds, almost like an internal little factory working behind the scenes. Humans do not have that factory. Neither do some other primates, along with a few other animals such as guinea pigs and certain bats. But many mammals can produce their own vitamin C without ever needing to think about oranges, berries, peppers, or fresh greens. Their bodies simply handle the job for them. Ours do not. That means vitamin C is not just something nice to have. It is something that has to come from the outside world. It has to arrive through food, again and again, over the course of a lifetime. In that way, vitamin C is part of a quiet relationship between the human body and the plant world around it. This raises an interesting question. If so many animals can make vitamin C, why can't we? The answer seems to go back a very long way. Scientists believe that deep in the past, some ancestors of humans lived on diets rich in fruits and other plant foods. Vitamin C may have been so easy to get from the environment that the body no longer needed to keep making it for itself. Over a very long stretch of time, a key part of that internal vitamin C making process was lost. In simple terms, the old recipe remained incomplete. A missing step in the body's chemistry meant that vitamin C could no longer be produced the way it once may have been in distant ancestors. Since food kept supplying enough of it, that loss did not immediately become a problem. Life went on. Generations passed. The dependency remained. And now here we are. Modern humans still carry that same limitation. We are members of a species that must keep returning to food for a nutrient that many other animals can prepare for themselves. It is one of those quiet biological facts that hides in plain sight. Most people live with it every day without ever giving it much thought. Yet it shapes more than it first seems to. It means the quality and variety of food matter in a deeper way. It means fresh plant foods have long played an important role in human health. It means long stretches without those foods can create real danger. And it means vitamin C became part of the long story of trade, farming, travel, storage, cooking, and survival. There is something almost gentle about this idea. Human beings are not fully separate from the natural world. We rely on it in intimate, daily ways. A fruit hanging from a branch, a pepper growing in a garden, a handful of greens on a plate. These are not just decorations around life. They are part of the exchange that keeps the body going. Vitamin C makes that relationship easier to see. It also reminds us that not all body needs arrive loudly. Some are quiet and steady. You do not feel vitamin C entering your bloodstream. You do not sense it moving through tissues. You do not hear it at work. But the body notices its absence over time. That is often how nutrients are. They do not usually demand attention when they are present. Instead, they do their work silently in the background. And only when they are missing does their importance begin to show. Vitamin C is one of the clearest examples of that pattern. It is ordinary enough to be taken for granted, yet important enough that an entire species must keep reaching for it through food. And that makes it more than a familiar name on a label. It makes it part of the basic design of human life. So the story of vitamin C begins with dependence. Not dependence in a dramatic sense, but in a calm biological one. A small daily reliance. A repeated need. A quiet truth carried by every human body. And once that truth is clear, another question begins to form. What exactly is this substance that human beings must keep seeking from the outside world? This bright little nutrient with such an ordinary name and such an unusual importance. Now that we know human beings depend on vitamin C from the outside world, it becomes easier to ask a calmer and more basic question. What is it exactly? The name sounds simple enough. Vitamin C. Just one letter, spoken so often that it almost feels more like a symbol than a real substance. But behind that familiar label is a real molecule with its own structure, its own behavior, and its own way of moving through the body. Vitamin C is also known as ascorbic acid. That second name can sound a little more technical, but it points to the same thing. When people say vitamin C, they are talking about ascorbic acid, the form best known in nutrition and in food science. It is one of the vitamins the body needs in order to carry out normal processes, but it does not work like fuel in the way food energy does. It is not something the body burns for calories. Instead, it helps support important chemical tasks that the body depends on. In that sense, vitamin C is less like firewood and more like a tool. It is present for work. Quiet work. Work that helps other things happen. One of the most important things to know about vitamin C is that it is water-soluble. This means it dissolves in water. Since the human body is full of watery fluids, blood, tissue fluid, and the contents of the digestive system, that matters a great deal. A water-soluble vitamin behaves differently from a fat-soluble one. Some vitamins can be stored more deeply in the body's fat and liver, remaining there for longer periods. Vitamin C does not behave in quite that way. It moves more freely through the body's fluids, and because of that, the body does not keep large, long-term stores of it. That is one reason regular intake matters. Vitamin C works best as something that arrives steadily, not something counted on to remain in deep reserve for long stretches. This also helps explain why vitamin C feels both common and slightly fragile. It is common because many foods contain it. But it is fragile because it does not sit heavily in the body for very long, and because it can also be reduced by time, heat, and exposure in food before it is even eaten. It lives in motion. It arrives, dissolves, travels, supports, and then, if there is more than the body can use at the moment, the extra can be carried away. That movement gives vitamin C a kind of gentle rhythm. It comes in through meals. It enters the bloodstream. It reaches tissues. It participates in quiet chemical processes. Then the cycle continues again, with the next fruit, the next vegetable, the next ordinary meal. There is something almost elegant in that simplicity. Even the word vitamins carries an interesting history. Vitamins were once understood as tiny but essential substances in food, things needed for life even when only small amounts were required. Vitamin C fits that idea well. The body does not need pounds of it. It needs enough. Enough and often enough for the background work of living tissue to continue. That background work is part of what makes vitamin C so easy to miss. A person does not usually feel vitamin C doing its job from one moment to the next. It does not create a loud sensation. It does not announce itself when it helps support the body. Like many important things in biology, it is most noticeable only when it is missing, or when people begin studying what goes wrong without it. And so vitamin C sits in an interesting place. It is chemically real, but culturally familiar. It is scientifically specific, but publicly simplified. Most people know the name, but far fewer know the nature of the substance itself. Yet once you understand that vitamin C is a water-loving, easily moving, quietly working molecule, its story begins to feel less vague and more alive. It becomes easier to see why it must be replenished. It becomes easier to see why fresh foods matter. And it becomes easier to understand how the absence of such a small, ordinary molecule could once cause such deep suffering in people who had no idea what was missing. Because once vitamin C is no longer just a label, once it becomes a real thing in the mind, it starts to connect chemistry with history, food with function, and daily life with the hidden needs of the human body. And that connection becomes even more striking when we return to a time before anyone knew what a vitamin was, but people were already paying the price for going without one. Long before anyone knew the word vitamin, people were already living with the consequences of not having enough of one. They could not see vitamin C. They could not name it. They could not describe its chemistry. But they could see what happened when it was missing for too long. Over time, the body began to weaken in ways that were slow, confusing, and deeply frightening. That condition became known as scurvy. Scurvy is one of the most famous deficiency diseases in history, not because it was rare, but because it appeared in some of the most difficult settings people could endure. It was especially feared on long sea voyages, when ships traveled far from land and fresh food disappeared for weeks or months at a time. Imagine the rhythm of life aboard one of those ships. Wood creaking, sails pulling in the wind, salt in the air. Long stretches of ocean with no fresh fruit, no green vegetables, and no easy way to replace foods that spoiled quickly. Sailors often lived on preserved items such as hard biscuits, salted meat, dried foods, and whatever else could survive the journey. These foods could provide calories. They could help people avoid hunger for a while, but they could not provide everything the body quietly needed. At first, the changes might not have seemed dramatic. A sailor could begin to feel more tired than usual. Muscles might ache. Weakness could creep in. There might be a general sense that the body was no longer as steady or reliable as before. In the beginning, that kind of decline could easily be blamed on the voyage itself, on poor sleep, hard labor, storms, fear, cold, infection, or simple exhaustion. But as time went on, the condition often became harder to ignore. Gums could swell and bleed. Teeth might loosen. Bruises could appear more easily. Wounds might heal badly or reopen. The body, which normally repairs itself in quiet and steady ways, began to show that something deeper was going wrong. In severe cases, people became too weak to work, too ill to recover, and sometimes too damaged to survive. Scurvy did not arrive like a sudden injury. It arrived like a slow unraveling. That slow pace was part of what made it so troubling. It was not always obvious at first what had caused it. There was no single moment when everyone could point and say, "There, that is when it began." Instead, the body drifted into trouble over time. A person who had once seemed strong enough for the sea could gradually become fragile, sore, and exhausted, all while surrounded by endless water and no clear answer. For centuries, people noticed patterns without fully understanding them. They knew that long voyages seemed dangerous in a special way. They knew that fresh foods often helped when they became available again. They knew that scurvy was more likely when diets became narrow and stale. But knowing a pattern is not the same as knowing a cause. Without the language of vitamins, the problem remained cloudy. Different explanations were offered. Some blamed bad air. Some blamed dampness, filth, fatigue, or salt. Some thought it came from the sea itself or from general decay in the body. And to be fair, life on ships was harsh enough that many of those things really did affect health. The difficulty was that scurvy had a specific hidden cause, and until that cause was understood, people were left trying to reason from symptoms alone. This is one of the strange things about nutritional disease. It can hide inside ordinary suffering. If a person is weak, in pain, and exhausted in a hard environment, the environment itself seems like the obvious explanation. It takes careful attention to realize that alongside all the visible hardships, there may be an invisible absence shaping everything from underneath. That invisible absence, in this case, was vitamin C. Though people did not know it yet, the lack of fresh plant foods was gradually stripping away the body's ability to maintain itself. The tissue weakness, the bleeding gums, the poor healing, the deep fatigue. These were not random failures. They were signs that something essential had been missing for too long. And because sea travel linked distant lands, trade routes, armies, and empires, scurvy became more than a medical problem. It became part of world history. A deficiency disease helped shape journeys, delays, suffering, and survival across oceans. It is a remarkable thought. One small nutrient, absent from the diet long enough, could change the fate of ships full of people. And once that is understood, another question begins to drift into view. If the problem was so serious, and if fresh food seemed to help, how did people finally begin to connect the mystery of scurvy with something as simple as citrus? The answer did not arrive all at once. No one stood on the deck of a ship one day and suddenly understood the whole chemistry of vitamin C. there was no instant moment when the fog cleared completely. Instead, the truth emerged slowly, through repeated experience, careful observation, and the quiet force of a pattern that kept returning. Again and again, people noticed that fresh plant food seemed to help. Sailors who had grown weak at sea often improved when they reached land and ate fresh fruits, greens, and other recently gathered foods. Strength returned. Gums improved. Bodies that had been fading began, little by little, to recover. Long before anyone could explain why, people could see that something in fresh food mattered. Among those foods, citrus fruits became especially famous. Lemons and limes were not the only foods that could help against scurvy, but they became some of the most memorable symbols of protection. They were strong in flavor, easy to identify, and powerful in reputation. Over time, they came to stand for a much larger discovery: the idea that the body could be protected not only by avoiding storms and enemy ships, but by carrying the right kind of food. That was a major change in thinking. For a long time, health at sea had been imagined mostly in terms of discipline, cleanliness, weather, hardiness, and luck. Those things certainly mattered. But now food itself was beginning to take on a new kind of importance. It was not only a source of energy, it was a source of specific protection. This may sound obvious now, but it was a profound shift. To realize that a simple food could prevent a devastating illness meant seeing the body in a new way. It meant understanding that the body did not merely need food in a broad sense. It needed particular unseen components within food. It needed freshness. It needed variety. It needed certain substances that could not always be preserved across time and distance. Citrus became part of that lesson. As ships traveled farther and empires stretched wider, the ability to prevent scurvy became more than a medical concern. It became a strategic one. Crews who remained healthier were more capable of sailing, fighting, working, and surviving long routes. A navy that could protect its sailors nutritionally had a real advantage over one that could not. In that sense, citrus did not just help individual bodies. It influenced exploration, trade, and power. A fruit had entered history. That is one of the loveliest things about the story of vitamin C. It reminds us that world-changing forces are not always grand or dramatic in themselves. Sometimes they are bright, fragrant, and small enough to fit in the hand. Sometimes the course of long voyages and distant empires can be shaped by something as humble as a lemon. Of course, the path from observation to consistent use was not perfectly smooth. Human beings are often slow to accept even good evidence, especially when old habits are strong. There were delays, debates, and uneven practices. Some voyages carried helpful foods, while others did not. Some leaders took the problem seriously, while others remained uncertain or careless. Knowledge often spreads more slowly than suffering does. Still, the direction of the lesson was becoming clearer. Fresh foods mattered, citrus mattered, preservation had limits, and the farther people moved from recently harvested foods, the more dangerous that absence could become. This also changed the meaning of distance itself. A long voyage was no longer only a matter of miles, weather, and navigation. It was also a race against the loss of freshness. Each passing week at sea increased the danger that the body's quiet supply of what it needed would begin to run down. Time, in that sense, became part of the disease. That idea links the story of scurvy to a much larger truth about human life. We do not simply live on calories. We live on details. Tiny chemical details hidden in food. We live on freshness that can fade, on nutrients that can disappear, on invisible necessities that become obvious only when they are gone. Citrus helped make that truth visible. It took something hidden and gave it a visible form. A sailor holding a lemon did not know the exact molecule doing the work, but the fruit had become a kind of bridge between mystery and understanding. It represented a practical answer before it represented a scientific one. And that practical answer mattered deeply. Because once people saw that scurvy could be prevented through food, the disease was no longer only a curse of the sea. It was a problem with a solution. Not a perfect solution, not an instantly adopted one, but a real one. That is a turning point in any story. The moment when suffering begins to look less mysterious and more understandable. And once fresh citrus and other plant foods were linked to prevention, a deeper question naturally followed. What exactly were these foods restoring inside the body that made such a difference between decline and recovery? To understand why scurvy could become so destructive, it helps to look not at dramatic illness first, but at ordinary structure. Much of the body depends on materials that must be quietly maintained all the time. Most people think of the body in terms of organs, bones, muscles, and blood. Those are the parts we learn to name. They feel large and clear in the mind. But underneath those familiar ideas is something softer and more constant, a hidden framework of support that helps hold the body together. It is not a rigid frame like wood or stone. It is living tissue, always being repaired, renewed, and maintained. One of the most important materials in that hidden framework is collagen. Collagen is a protein, and it is one of the main structural proteins in the human body. It helps give strength and form to many tissues. Skin depends on it. Gums depend on it. Blood vessels depend on it. Tendons, cartilage, and other connective tissues depend on it too. In a quiet way, collagen is part of what helps the body remain firm, flexible, and durable at the same time. That makes collagen easy to overlook. When it is doing its job well, nothing dramatic seems to happen. Skin holds together. Blood vessels stay strong. Gums stay firm. Tendons connect muscle to bone. Cartilage helps cushion joints. Everyday structure continues in the background, and people move through life without giving much thought to the protein helping support so much of it. But collagen does not simply appear on its own. The body has to make it, and vitamin C is essential to that process. Without enough vitamin C, the body struggles to form collagen properly. The building work becomes weaker. The maintenance work becomes weaker. And because collagen is used in so many places, the effects do not stay limited to one corner of the body. They spread. This is one of the most important ways to understand vitamin C. It is not just linked to a general feeling of health in some vague way. It is connected to the actual strength of tissues. It helps the body maintain physical structure. That means the story of vitamin C is not only about energy or wellness in the broad, popular sense. It is about whether the body can keep renewing the materials that support it from within. You can imagine it almost like repair work on a large living house. If the materials are strong and the upkeep continues, the walls remain sound, the seams remain stable, and small daily wear does not become a larger problem. But if the materials begin to weaken, the signs may appear in many places at once, not because every part failed for a different reason, but because the same hidden support system was under strain everywhere. That is why vitamin C deficiency can seem so wide-reaching. The skin may suffer, the gums may suffer, blood vessels may become more fragile, tissues that are used constantly or placed under small daily stress may start to show weakness more clearly. The problem is not random. The body is revealing the places where structure matters most. And structure matters almost everywhere. It matters in the thin walls of tiny blood vessels. It matters in the tissues that anchor teeth in place. It matters in the surfaces that bend, stretch, and recover each day. It matters in places we rarely think about because they usually function so smoothly. The body is full of these quiet supports. When collagen is made well, they remain almost invisible to us. When collagen production weakens, they begin to come into view. This helps explain why scurvy was never just a strange illness of tired sailors. It was the visible result of a body losing some of its ability to maintain its own framework. The weakness, bleeding, poor healing, and breakdown that people saw were not separate mysteries. They were connected signs of a deeper problem in the body's building work. That idea gives vitamin C a different kind of importance. It is not a flashy nutrient. It does not ask for attention. But it is part of the reason tissues can stay strong under the constant demands of living. In a body that is always wearing down a little and rebuilding a little, vitamin C helps make rebuilding possible. And once that is understood, many of the visible symptoms of deficiency begin to make much more sense. If collagen is part of the body's hidden framework, then low vitamin C would not just change how people feel. It would change how the body holds together. Once we think of vitamin C as part of the body's repair work, some of its most visible effects begin to make much more sense. The body is always dealing with small forms of wear. Skin stretches and bends. Tiny blood vessels handle pressure every moment of the day. Gums face constant friction from chewing and brushing. Small cuts happen. Scrapes happen. Bruises happen. Even without major injury, the body is always repairing, replacing, and reinforcing itself in quiet ways. Most of this work goes unnoticed. A paper cut closes. A bruise fades. A sore spot improves. Skin renews itself. The body moves through small damage and small recovery so often that it begins to feel automatic. And in many ways it is. But that automatic quality depends on systems in the background doing their work well. One of those systems involves collagen, and collagen depends in part on vitamin C. This is where the story becomes easier to see. When vitamin C is too low, the body may still go on functioning for a while, but some of its repair and maintenance work becomes weaker. The hidden structure beneath the surface is no longer being supported as well as it should be. And because skin, gums, and blood vessels are all tissues that rely on strength and renewal, they can begin to show the effects. Skin is a good place to begin. People often think of skin as a simple outer covering, but it is a living tissue with layers, structure, and constant activity. It protects the body from the outside world, helps hold moisture, and responds to pressure temperature, and injury. To do all of this well, it needs strength as well as flexibility. Collagen helps provide that support. When the body cannot maintain collagen properly, skin may become less resilient, and the larger repair process can become less steady. Wound healing is another part of the picture. When the body is injured, even in a small way, it begins a careful process of repair. It must stop bleeding, clean up damaged cells, rebuild tissue, and restore strength to the area. That is not one simple action. It is a sequence of coordinated steps. Vitamin C supports part of this process by helping the body make and maintain the connective material needed for repair. Without enough of it, healing can become slower or weaker. This helps explain why one of the classic features of vitamin C deficiency is poor wound healing. A person may not just feel tired. They may notice that small injuries do not recover as cleanly or as quickly as expected. The body is still trying to repair itself, but the materials and support systems are not working at full strength. The gums are another especially important example. Gums are soft tissues, but they are also active and exposed tissues. They are under constant pressure from eating, speaking, brushing, and the ordinary movement of the mouth. They need strong connective support to stay healthy. When vitamin C is too low and collagen support weakens, the gums can become tender, swollen, or more likely to bleed. In severe deficiency, this can become one of the clearest signs that the body's deeper structure is under strain. That is one reason scurvy could look so alarming. Bleeding gums and loosening teeth are easy to notice. They are visible, unsettling signs. But they are not random symptoms. They are signals that the tissues holding things in place are no longer as strong as they should be. Bruising fits into this picture too. A bruise forms when small blood vessels are damaged and blood leaks into nearby tissue. Normally, blood vessels are supported by strong surrounding structure. When tissues become more fragile, bruising may happen more easily. Again, the problem is not only on the surface. It reflects a weakness in the body's maintenance system underneath. So the visible signs of vitamin C deficiency are often really signs of weakened structure. The skin may look normal for a while, but healing becomes less reliable. The gums may become one of the first places to show deeper trouble. Bruises may appear more easily. The body may seem less durable, less able to recover cleanly from ordinary stress. What we see on the outside is often the surface expression of something quieter going wrong within. That is part of what makes vitamin C so interesting. Its work is easy to miss when everything is fine. But when repair begins to weaken, it becomes easier to understand how much the body depends on steady background support. Vitamin C is not dramatic, but the loss of it can be. And even repair is only part of the story. Vitamin C does not only help support the body's visible tissues, it also works in ways that are much less visible, deep inside cells themselves. Vitamin C is often mentioned whenever people talk about immunity, but that connection is calmer and more interesting than the simple idea of a miracle shield. Over time, vitamin C became one of the most famous nutrients in popular health culture. People began to connect it with staying well, especially during cold seasons or times when illness seemed to be everywhere. That reputation made vitamin C sound almost magical in some conversations. as if it were a kind of instant armor the body could put on whenever needed. The real story is quieter than that. Vitamin C does help support normal immune system function, but it does not act like a switch that turns health on or off. The immune system is not one thing. It is a wide, complex network made up of cells, signals, barriers, tissues, and responses that work together in changing ways. It depends on many parts of the body doing their jobs well, and that means it depends on many nutrients, not just one. Vitamin C belongs inside that broader support system. It helps the body maintain tissues, and that matters because some of those tissues help form the body's first barriers against the outside world. Skin and inner linings are not just surfaces. They are part of how the body separates itself from what does not belong inside. When tissues are well maintained, that protective role is stronger. When tissue support weakens, the body may have a harder time maintaining those barriers smoothly. Vitamin C is also present in immune cells themselves. This makes sense when you consider how active those cells are. Immune cells are busy cells. They move, signal, respond, multiply, and help manage the body's reactions to challenge and injury. All of that requires energy, coordination, and chemical support. Vitamin C is one of the many nutrients involved in helping those cells function normally. That does not mean more vitamin C always creates a stronger and stronger immune response. The body does not usually work in such a simple straight line. Nutrition is often about meeting needs, not endlessly pushing beyond them. A body that has enough vitamin C can use it for the jobs it is meant to do. A body that lacks enough may struggle more. That is a much steadier and more realistic picture than the dramatic claims that sometimes grow around the vitamin. In a way, vitamin C's reputation tells us something interesting about human nature. People are drawn to simple solutions, especially when it comes to health. One nutrient, one food, one habit, one answer. That kind of thinking is comforting. It makes the body seem easier to manage. But real biology is usually less dramatic and more interconnected than that. The immune system depends on sleep, nourishment, hydration, recovery, overall health, and many different molecules and cells doing their work together. Vitamin C matters inside that whole picture. It is not the entire story, and it does not need to be in order to be important. Its real role is quieter and perhaps more impressive for that reason. It helps support normal function. It contributes to the body's ordinary readiness. It participates in a system that is active every day, whether a person is thinking about it or not. That quieter role can be harder to appreciate because it does not sound flashy. But many of the body's most important functions are like that. They are not dramatic when they are working well. They are steady. They are background processes. They are the unnoticed forms of support that only become visible when they start to weaken. Vitamin C fits that pattern very well. Its public image became much larger than its simple everyday biology. But that does not mean the biology is unimportant. In fact, it may be the opposite. The reason people kept talking about vitamin C for so long is that it does have a real connection to the body's defenses. The problem is only that the real connection is more balanced and less theatrical than popular culture sometimes makes it seem. And perhaps that is part of what makes vitamin C such a gentle subject for reflection. It reminds us that health is not usually held together by miracle cures. It is held together by steady support, repeated daily, in small, invisible ways. A nutrient does not need to be magical to matter. It only needs to be part of the body's ongoing work. And if vitamin C supports the body in these quieter ways, then an even more hidden question begins to rise. What is it actually doing down at the level of individual cells, where so much of life's chemistry unfolds out of sight? Inside the body, much of vitamin C's work is not dramatic at all. It belongs to a hidden world of reactions, exchanges, and small chemical balances that never ask to be noticed. Most of life happens out of sight. A person can feel hunger, warmth, pain, or tiredness, but the deeper chemistry of the body goes on silently underneath those sensations. Cells are busy places. They take in materials, release energy, build proteins, send signals, remove waste, and respond to constant change. All of this activity keeps life moving, but it also creates strain. Living things are active things, and activity always brings some wear with it. That is where vitamin C enters one of its quieter roles. Vitamin C acts as an antioxidant. That word can sound grand or mysterious, but the basic idea is simple. During normal life processes, cells produce certain reactive molecules. These are not always harmful in themselves. Some are part of ordinary chemistry, and some even help with signaling. But if too many reactive molecules build up, or if the balance shifts too far, they can begin to damage important parts of the cell. This kind of chemical strain is often called oxidative stress. Again, the name can sound more dramatic than the reality. Oxidative stress is not some strange event that appears from nowhere. It is part of the ordinary chemistry of living. Cells are always managing reactions. They are always dealing with energy movement, oxygen use, and the small byproducts that come with being alive. The body has systems to manage this, and vitamin C is one part of that broader effort. In simple terms, vitamin C helps neutralize certain reactive molecules before they cause as much trouble. It is not working alone. The body has many protective systems, many enzymes, and many antioxidant compounds that help maintain balance. Vitamin C is one member of a larger team. That is important to remember, because it keeps us from imagining vitamin C as a lone hero racing through the body to save the day. Biology is usually more cooperative than that. Life is built from networks, not single stars. Still, vitamin C plays a meaningful part in that network. It helps protect important molecules from certain kinds of damage. Cell membranes, proteins, and even genetic material all exist inside an environment where chemical balance matters. When that balance is maintained, the cell can keep doing its work more smoothly. When the balance is disturbed too often or too severely, the wear becomes harder to manage. This gives vitamin C a kind of quiet protective role. Not protection in the sense of building a hard wall, but protection in the sense of reducing strain, helping preserve order, and supporting the conditions cells need in order to function well. It is part of the body's daily housekeeping, in a way. A small helper in the endless work of keeping chemistry from becoming too chaotic. There is something comforting about that image. The body is not only a machine of effort, it is also a system of repair, regulation, and balance. It is always correcting, adjusting, and restoring. Vitamin C belongs to that side of life, the side that keeps activity from turning too easily into damage. That may also help explain why steady intake matters so much. If vitamin C were only needed for one rare event now and then, the body could perhaps manage with long gaps. But much of its work takes place in daily cellular life. Cells do not stop being active. Tissues do not stop renewing. Small reactive molecules do not stop being produced. The chemistry of life keeps moving, and so the need for support keeps moving too. This is another reason vitamin C feels less like a dramatic medicine and more like a quiet companion. It travels through the body, dissolved in watery fluids, reaching tissues and participating in tiny chemical moments that never become visible to us. Most of the time, no one notices. And yet those unnoticed moments are part of what allows larger visible life to continue as it does. A person walking outdoors, speaking, sleeping, healing, digesting, thinking, breathing, all of it depends on cells doing their work. And cells do their work in an environment that needs care. Vitamin C is part of that care. So while the public image of vitamin C often settles on fruit bowls, citrus juice, and cold season habits, its deeper life is much quieter. It belongs to the interior world, the microscopic world, where balance is maintained not with fanfare, but with countless tiny acts of support. And all of that hidden chemistry begins somewhere very simple: a bite of fruit, a forkful of vegetables, a sip of something fresh. From there, the journey becomes part of the body, which makes the next question feel close and natural. How does vitamin C actually move from food into the bloodstream, and from the bloodstream into the places where it is needed? Like many nutrients, vitamin C begins its work with an ordinary act. It is eaten, absorbed, carried, used, and then, if there is too much at once, quietly sent away. The journey starts in the mouth, but not in any dramatic way. A person bites into an orange, slices a pepper, eats a few strawberries, or takes in vitamin C through some other food. At first, it is simply part of the meal. It is mixed with flavor, texture, water, sugars, fiber, and all the other small parts that make food what it is. Nothing about that moment announces the larger path that is about to unfold inside the body. Once swallowed, the food moves through the digestive system. There, the body begins separating what can be used from what cannot. Digestion is often imagined as a rough process of breaking things down, but it is also selective. The body is constantly sorting, absorbing, moving, and deciding. Vitamin C, because it is water-soluble, moves into that process in a particular way. It can dissolve into the watery environment of digestion and become available for absorption. Most absorption happens in the small intestine. This is where many nutrients cross from digested food into the body itself. The inside of the small intestine is lined with structures that help increase surface area, giving the body more opportunity to take in what it needs. Vitamin C passes through this stage and enters the bloodstream, where it can then be carried to different tissues. That shift is important. Once vitamin C enters the blood, it is no longer just part of food. It has become part of the body's internal traffic. The bloodstream is like a moving river of supply, carrying oxygen, hormones, nutrients, and many other substances from one place to another. Vitamin C joins that movement and becomes available to cells and tissues that need it for their own quiet work. Some tissues take in more than others. The body is not uniform. Different places have different needs and different levels of activity. Vitamin C can become concentrated in certain tissues because of the kinds of work happening there. This makes sense when we remember its roles in collagen support, cellular protection, and normal immune function. The nutrient is carried where it can be used, not simply left drifting without purpose. And yet, despite all this usefulness, the body does not treat vitamin C as something to store in huge long-term reserves. That is one of the defining features of a water-soluble vitamin. It moves more freely through the body's fluids than fat-soluble vitamins do. Because of that, vitamin C is not packed away in large amounts for future months in the same way some other nutrients can be. The body keeps what it can use and manage, but beyond that, extra amounts are generally not held forever. Instead, excess vitamin C is usually excreted. The kidneys filter the blood and help regulate what stays in the body and what leaves it. If vitamin C intake is greater than what the body can use or keep, at the moment, the extra is often removed in urine. This is part of why vitamin C has such a different rhythm from nutrients that can be stored more deeply. Its story is one of regular arrival, regular use, and regular departure. That rhythm matters. It helps explain why steady intake is more useful than treating vitamin C, like something the body can stockpile for a very long time. A diet that includes vitamin C regularly supports the body's ongoing needs more naturally than long stretches of very little followed by a sudden burst. The body seems to prefer continuity, a quiet supply, a repeated replenishing. There is something peaceful about that pattern. It reflects the broader truth that the body often works best with consistency rather than extremes. It likes ongoing support. It likes balance. It likes having what it needs when it needs it, instead of depending on rare abundance. Vitamin C fits that style of living very well. It arrives through ordinary meals, moves through digestion, crosses into the bloodstream, travels to tissues, joins the body's invisible work, and then, when there is more than needed, leaves without drama. It is a nutrient with motion built into its nature. And because of that, it is also a nutrient that keeps bringing us back to food. Not to mystery powders first, not to distant promises, but to the simple question of what appears on the plate. What is eaten today becomes part of the body tomorrow. A sliced kiwi, a bowl of berries, a cooked vegetable, a piece of citrus. All of these can become the start of that quiet internal journey. And when people picture that journey, one kind of food usually comes to mind before all others. They think of oranges, lemons, and citrus. But vitamin C's story in food is wider than that, and brighter in more directions than many people first imagine. Vitamin C has a bright public image for a reason. Some of its most famous food sources are colorful, fragrant, juicy, and easy to picture even with your eyes closed. For many people, the story begins with an orange. An orange is more than a fruit in the public imagination. It is almost a symbol. Bright peel, sweet scent, cool juice, little bursts of flavor. All of it has become closely tied to the idea of vitamin C. Even people who do not know much about nutrition often grow up with this simple pairing already fixed in the mind. Oranges mean vitamin C. That connection is powerful, partly because it is easy to remember. Vitamin C is invisible, but oranges are vivid. They are round, bright, and cheerful. They feel fresh before they are even opened. Their color suggests sunlight. Their scent suggests cleanliness and energy. Their juice has long been linked with mornings, breakfast tables, and the idea of starting the day with something lively and good. That emotional connection matters more than people sometimes realize. Food is not only chemistry. It is memory, routine, color, texture, and feeling. A nutrient becomes easier to remember when it is attached to something sensory and pleasant. Vitamin C gained much of its public identity through fruits that were easy to love and easy to picture. Of course, oranges are only one part of the fruit story. Other citrus fruits also play their role. Lemons, limes, grapefruits, mandarins, and similar fruits all help reinforce the same image of brightness and freshness. Their sharp, lively flavor made them memorable long before nutrition labels existed. In the history of vitamin C, citrus became the public face of something the body quietly needed. But the fruit world is wider than citrus alone. Kiwis are often rich in vitamin C. Strawberries, with their soft sweetness and tiny seeds, are another familiar source. Guava can contain a great deal. Papaya also belongs in the conversation. Even fruits that are not always the first to come to mind can contribute meaningful amounts. The result is that vitamin C is spread across a whole range of textures and flavors, from tart to sweet, from juicy to delicate. This makes vitamin C feel less like a single food story and more like a pattern in the plant world. Bright fruits often carry it, though not always in ways people expect. A person may assume that the most famous fruit must also always be the richest source. But nature is not organized around advertising. Sometimes a quieter fruit contains more than the one that became most famous. Public reputation and nutritional content do not always match perfectly. Still, reputation has its own power. Fruit gave vitamin C much of its cultural personality. It made the nutrient seem fresh, lively, and a little sunny. That is one reason vitamin C occupies such a special place in childhood memory. Many people first hear about it not through formal science, but through simple reminders to eat fruit, drink juice, or finish what is on the plate. Before it becomes chemistry, it becomes habit. In that sense, vitamin C has always lived partly in the world of feeling. It is tied to the smell of a peeled orange, the coolness of fruit from the refrigerator, the sweetness of berries, the sharpness of lemon, the brightness of morning juice. It became one of the few nutrients with a strong emotional image, and fruit is the reason why. That image is not false. Fruit really is an important source, but it is incomplete. Because once we step beyond the familiar world of oranges and berries, vitamin C begins to appear in places that feel less glamorous and less expected. It turns up not only in bowls on the breakfast table, but in the quieter corners of dinner plates and kitchen counters, in chopped vegetables, in cooked greens, in foods that do not get nearly the same attention for it. And that may be one of the loveliest things about the story. The nutrient that became famous through sweetness and citrus also lives in more ordinary, savory, and understated foods. Vitamin C may wear the bright public face of fruit, but it does not belong to fruit alone. Some of its strongest food sources are quieter, greener, and less celebrated. They may not smell like breakfast or look like sunlight in the same way. They may not have built vitamin C's public reputation, but they help carry the same invisible molecule into daily life all the same, often from a very different part of the meal. If fruit made vitamin C famous, vegetables often did the heavier lifting without getting the same attention. That may sound surprising at first. For many people, vitamin C still lives almost entirely in the world of oranges, lemons, berries, and juice glasses. The public image is so strong that it can feel complete. But once we step away from the bright fruit bowl and look more carefully at the rest of the kitchen, another side of the story begins to appear. Vitamin C is not only a fruit nutrient, it is also very much a vegetable nutrient, and in some cases, vegetables contain even more of it than the fruits most people think of first. Bell peppers are one of the best examples. They do not usually enjoy the same cultural fame as oranges when people talk about vitamin C, yet they can be remarkably rich in it. Red bell peppers in particular are often highlighted as a strong source, though other colors also contribute. This can feel almost strange to learn, because peppers do not match the public image people have built around vitamin C. They are savory, crisp, and often linked to lunches, salads, stir-fries, or dinners rather than breakfast and juice. And yet, there they are, carrying the same familiar nutrient in generous amounts. Broccoli belongs in the story too. So do Brussels sprouts, kale, cabbage, and potatoes. These foods may not sound dramatic, but that is part of what makes them interesting. They show how vitamin C is woven into ordinary eating, not just into moments of obvious brightness. A person might not sit down with a plate of steamed broccoli and think, "Ah yes, vitamin C." And yet broccoli can offer just that. The same is true for other greens and vegetables that quietly contribute to daily intake without building much public reputation for it. Potatoes are especially interesting in this way. They are rarely thought of as vitamin C foods first, but in many diets they have mattered simply because they are eaten so often. A food does not always need to be the richest source in theory to become meaningful in practice. If it appears on the plate regularly, it can help supply what the body needs through repetition and habit. That is one of the quiet truths of nutrition. Daily intake often comes not from one perfect food, but from the steady accumulation of ordinary meals. This makes vitamin C feel less like a specialty nutrient and more like part of the fabric of everyday life. It can arrive through lunch as easily as breakfast, through soup as easily as fruit salad, through a dinner plate as easily as a glass of juice. Once we see that, the whole story becomes calmer and more complete. Vitamin C is no longer tied to one flavor or one kind of eating. It is spread through the wider landscape of food. It also reminds us how strongly public ideas are shaped by branding and memory. Citrus fruits earned vitamin C its fame, and for good reason. They are vivid, memorable, and historically important. But fame is not the same thing as total truth. A nutrient can have one public face and many private homes. Vegetables became some of those quieter homes. They carried vitamin C into daily life without the same applause. There is something rather lovely about that. a chopped pepper on a cutting board, a handful of Brussels sprouts, a pot of cabbage, a bowl of broccoli, a baked potato on a plate. These are not foods that usually inspire grand nutritional myths, but they matter all the same. They help show that much of nutrition is not dramatic. It is built from repetition, from meals that seem ordinary, from foods that are simply present often enough to do their quiet work. And perhaps that is one of the most relaxing truths in the whole subject. The body is not always asking for rare or exotic things. Often, it is asking for regular care from familiar foods. Vitamin C can come wrapped in sweetness and citrus, but it can also come through the softer routine of everyday vegetables, the kinds of foods that appear without fanfare in kitchens all over the world. Still, the amount in food is not fixed forever. Once a vegetable or fruit is picked, stored, cut, and cooked, that bright invisible nutrient may begin to change. Time starts to matter. Exposure starts to matter. And what was once fresh and full can slowly become something a little less so. Vitamin C is useful, but it is not stubborn. It is one of those nutrients whose amount can slowly change depending on time, handling, and exposure. That may sound a little strange at first. People often imagine the nutrients in food as fixed, almost like numbers printed on a label that stay the same no matter what happens next. But food is not frozen in time the moment it is picked. A fruit or vegetable continues its journey after harvest. It is moved, packed, stored, displayed, carried home, placed in a bowl or refrigerator, and eventually prepared. During that time, small changes continue. Flavor can shift, texture can shift, and certain nutrients, including vitamin C, can slowly decline. This is because vitamin C is delicate. It is helpful, but it is not especially tough. Heat can affect it. Light can affect it. Oxygen can affect it. Time itself can affect it. None of this means vitamin C vanishes the moment food leaves the garden or market. But it does mean that a very fresh fruit or vegetable may not be exactly the same as one that has been sitting for a long while. That difference is part of what makes freshness meaningful. Freshness is often treated like a matter of taste alone. A crisp pepper, a fragrant orange, a bright bunch of greens. Those qualities do matter, of course. Fresh food often smells better, feels better, and looks more alive. But freshness can also matter nutritionally. The longer time passes, the more opportunity there is for delicate compounds to break down. Vitamin C is one of the compounds that can do just that. Imagine a fruit hanging on a tree or a pepper still growing in a garden. It is part of a living system. Water is moving. Cells are active. The plant is still connected to the larger structure that supports it. Once it is picked, that living connection is interrupted. The food does not become useless, but it does begin a new phase. Moisture can be lost. Texture can soften. Internal chemistry can change. Slowly, quietly, the food begins to move away from peak freshness. Storage conditions shape this process. A cool, dark place may help preserve some foods better than a hot, bright one. A refrigerator can slow certain kinds of change. Exposure to air can matter too. Even before a knife touches the food, the simple question of where it sits and how long it waits can influence what remains inside it. This helps explain why two versions of the same food may not be nutritionally identical. A freshly picked strawberry and one that has traveled a long distance and sat for days are still both strawberries. A green vegetable bought and used quickly is still the same vegetable as one forgotten in a drawer for too long. But the details may differ. Vitamin C does not always remain at the same level across that whole stretch of time. That idea also gives a new meaning to distance. In the modern world, people are used to food traveling. Fruit from faraway places appears on shelves. Vegetables can be shipped over long routes and across seasons. This makes diets more varied, which is a remarkable thing. But transport takes time, and time matters to delicate nutrients. The farther food must travel, the longer the chain between harvest and eating may become. In some cases, that can mean less vitamin C by the time the food reaches the plate. The history of scurvy makes this even more vivid. Scurvy was, in part, a story about the loss of freshness. Sailors were not simply missing healthy food in a vague sense. They were cut off from foods that still carried the fragile nutrients their bodies needed. Salted meat and hard biscuits could survive the journey, but freshness could not. And with the loss of freshness came the loss of vitamin C. That is one of the quiet lessons hidden inside the history. Food is not static. It changes over time. The body depends not only on what a food is, but on what remains in it by the time it is eaten. A long distance between harvest and meal can matter. So can long storage in the kitchen. So can the ordinary delay between buying food and finally preparing it. There is something almost tender in that truth. Vitamin C belongs to living freshness. It asks for a certain nearness between the plant world and the human body. Not always immediate, not always perfect, but close enough that some of that bright chemistry remains when the meal begins. And once we understand that storage alone can slowly reduce vitamin C, another question naturally follows. What happens after the food is peeled, chopped, boiled, steamed, roasted, or left simmering in a pot, when the quiet chemistry of the kitchen begins to change it even more? The kitchen changes food in many ways. It softens textures, deepens flavors, releases aromas, and sometimes reduces the presence of certain nutrients along the way. That is not a flaw in cooking. It is simply part of what cooking does. A raw pepper and a roasted pepper are not quite the same thing. A fresh cabbage leaf and a pot of simmered cabbage offer different textures, different flavors, and different forms of comfort. Heat transforms food. It can make things sweeter, softer, warmer, and easier to digest. It can also alter delicate compounds, and vitamin C happens to be one of the compounds that does not always remain unchanged. Even before heat enters the picture, the process can begin with a knife. Cutting food opens it up. A fruit or vegetable that was once sealed in its own structure is now exposed. More surface area meets the air, more moisture can escape. More of the inner chemistry becomes vulnerable to time and oxygen. This does not mean a chopped fruit or vegetable instantly loses all value. Far from it. But once food is cut, a quiet clock begins to matter a little more. That is especially true for a nutrient like vitamin C. Because vitamin C is sensitive to oxygen and time, a freshly sliced food may slowly lose some of it as it sits. A pepper chopped and eaten soon may not be quite the same as one chopped and left waiting much longer. a halved fruit stored for later, may still be useful and nourishing, but the passage of time matters in a way it did not before the peel or skin was broken. Then comes cooking. Heat can reduce vitamin C, particularly when food is cooked for a long time. The nutrient is delicate enough that high temperatures and prolonged exposure can gradually break some of it down. Again, this is not something dramatic that happens in a single moment. It is more like a fading than a collapse. The longer and harsher the cooking, the more opportunity there is for vitamin C to decline. Boiling is especially interesting here. Because vitamin C is water-soluble, it does not only face heat during boiling, it also enters the cooking water itself. That means prolonged boiling can reduce vitamin C in two ways at once. Heat may damage some of it, and some of it may dissolve into the water rather than remain in the food. If the cooking water is later discarded, that can mean part of the nutrient leaves with it. This is one reason gentler cooking methods are often said to preserve more vitamin C. Steaming, quick sautéing, or shorter cooking times may allow food to soften and warm without exposing it to the same level of loss as long, aggressive boiling. The food is still changed, of course, but perhaps not as heavily. In this way, the kitchen becomes a place of trade-offs. Greater softness may come with some nutrient loss. More raw freshness may preserve more of certain compounds, but cooking may improve texture, flavor, comfort, and even the usefulness of other nutrients in the same meal. That last point matters. Raw food is not automatically better in every way, just as cooked food is not automatically worse. The truth is usually gentler than that. A raw strawberry offers one experience. A bowl of cooked broccoli offers another. A lightly steamed vegetable may preserve more vitamin C than one boiled for a very long time. But both may still have a place in a healthy way of eating. Food is not simply a contest of perfection. It is a balancing of nourishment, pleasure, habit, digestion, and practicality. And practicality shapes the kitchen more than theory does. People cook the way their lives allow. They use what they have. They work with time, money, energy, traditions, and taste. Nutrition exists inside those ordinary household habits, not outside them. A meal is not only chemistry, it is also family routine, available ingredients, favorite textures, and the quiet desire to make something satisfying. That is part of what makes vitamin C such an interesting subject. It lives not only in science, but in daily life. It is affected by the waiting on the cutting board, the steam rising from a pot, the roasting tray in the oven, the vegetables forgotten in the fridge, the food prepared quickly, and the food cooked slowly. Its story continues not just in the field or the bloodstream, but in the ordinary choreography of kitchens. And over time, those habits can matter. If foods rich in vitamin C are repeatedly stored too long, cooked too hard, or simply missing from the diet for extended periods, the body may begin to feel that absence. Not all at once, not dramatically at first, but gradually, in the quiet way deficiency often begins. So the effects of too little vitamin C do not always start with a famous disease name. They often begin more softly, with a dimming of the body's usual ease, long before the larger signs of scurvy become clear. Deficiency rarely announces itself all at once. More often, it begins like a dimming, a gradual weakening of systems that usually run so quietly we forget they are there. That is one reason nutritional deficiency can be difficult to notice at first. The body does not always fail in dramatic ways from the beginning. Instead, it often starts by becoming a little less steady. A person may feel more tired than usual. Recovery may feel slower. Small discomforts may linger. There may be no single moment that feels clear enough to name. Just a soft sense that the body is not moving through ordinary life with quite the same ease as before. With vitamin C, that early dimming can take several forms. Fatigue is one of the gentler signs. A person may not feel sharply ill, but may begin to feel drained, worn down, or less able to bounce back. This kind of tiredness can be easy to ignore because it overlaps with so many other parts of life. Poor sleep, hard work, stress, illness, and ordinary exhaustion can all look similar. That makes a quiet nutritional problem harder to recognize. At the same time, tissue-related changes may begin to appear. Because vitamin C helps support collagen, the body's connective tissues can start to show subtle strain when there is too little of it over time. Skin may seem less resilient. Small wounds may heal more slowly. Bruises may appear more easily. Gums may become tender or bleed more than usual. None of these changes are random. They reflect the body's growing difficulty in maintaining the structure and repair of tissues that are always under small daily pressures. This is what makes vitamin C deficiency so revealing. It does not only affect how a person feels in a general sense, it can also affect how well the body holds itself together in specific physical ways. The signs may first seem unrelated: a bruise here, gum tenderness there, slower healing somewhere else, but they often belong to the same deeper pattern. The body is quietly showing that one of its maintenance systems is under strain. Over time, if the deficiency becomes more severe, those softer signs can deepen into the more recognizable picture of scurvy. This is where the history from earlier begins to return in a more vivid way. The bleeding gums, fragile tissues, fatigue, and poor healing that sailors once experienced were not separate misfortunes. They were the visible outcome of a deficiency that had been worsening step by step. Severe vitamin C deficiency can lead to weakness in connective tissues throughout the body, making old symptoms harder to ignore and new ones harder to avoid. That gradual path matters. It reminds us that deficiency is usually not a sudden fall from perfect health into disaster. There is often a middle ground, a slow shift across a range. The body moves from adequate support into reduced support, then from reduced support into increasingly visible trouble. Nutrients do not usually operate like light switches. They work more like dimmers, with the body functioning best when its needs are met steadily and beginning to struggle when those needs go unmet for too long. This is one of the most calming and important truths in nutrition. The body is always adjusting. It is not either fully fine or fully broken. It is moving along a spectrum, responding to what it has, what it lacks, what it can repair, and what it can no longer keep up with. Vitamin C deficiency simply makes that spectrum easier to see because its effects reach into the physical fabric of the body itself. It also helps explain why scurvy became such a striking disease in history. By the time scurvy was obvious, the process had already been unfolding for quite a while. The severe signs were the late expression of a longer absence. They were what happened after the dimming had gone too far, after the body's quiet repair systems had been asked to keep working without the support they needed. That makes vitamin C feel both humble and important. Humble because the body does not need huge, dramatic amounts of it. Important because without enough of it, the ordinary work of maintenance begins to weaken. And once maintenance weakens, larger problems can grow out of what first looks small. So the story of deficiency is really a story of continuity. The body does not simply ask whether vitamin C is present or absent. It seems to ask whether enough is arriving, whether it is arriving regularly, and whether the quiet work of repair and support can keep going without interruption. And that brings us to a very natural question. If vitamin C deficiency can unfold gradually like this, then how much does the body really seem to need in order for all of that quiet maintenance to continue smoothly? The body does not need endless vitamin C, but it does seem to prefer something steady, regular, and dependable, rather than long stretches of absence followed by bursts of excess. That idea is one of the quiet themes running through the whole story. Vitamin C is not a nutrient the body seems to treat like a treasure, to lock away for a distant emergency. Because it is water-soluble, it moves through the body in a different rhythm. It is taken in, absorbed, used, and when there is more than needed at the moment, some of the extra is carried away. That creates a pattern of regular use rather than long-term hoarding. In simple terms, the body seems to want enough, and it seems to want that enough to keep arriving. Not an endless flood, not a dramatic shortage, just a dependable supply that supports the quiet work going on in tissues, cells, blood vessels, skin, gums, and all the other places where vitamin C plays its part. This is why consistency matters more than spectacle. People are often tempted by nutritional extremes. They imagine that if a little is necessary, then a lot must be even better. Or they go in the other direction and assume the body can simply make do for long stretches and catch up later. But vitamin C does not fit very well into either of those dramatic ideas. It is better understood as a nutrient of continuity. A little, again and again, matters more than a sudden burst after a long gap. That is part of what makes ordinary meals so important. A person does not usually need to think of vitamin C as some distant scientific concept in order to benefit from it. When fruits and vegetables appear regularly in daily life, the body is often given the chance to keep receiving what it needs in a calm and familiar way. A sliced pepper at lunch, berries with breakfast, broccoli at dinner, a piece of citrus in the afternoon. These can all become part of a pattern that quietly supports the body over time. Official guidance exists to describe everyday needs, and that guidance can be useful. But the larger lesson is not really about memorizing a number for tonight's purposes. It is about understanding the style of need. Vitamin C is generally needed in modest but consistent amounts. Its story is not one of giant reserves or dramatic extremes. It is a story of regular replenishment. That may sound almost too simple, but simple ideas are often the truest ones. The body is not asking for a heroic performance here. It is asking for steadiness, for the kind of support that can come from food appearing often enough, in enough variety, to keep the background systems of repair and balance running smoothly. This way of thinking also helps make nutrition feel less stressful. When people hear about nutrients, they sometimes begin imagining perfect intake, exact measurements, ideal meals, and constant optimization. But the body is often more forgiving and more practical than those fears suggest. It responds to patterns. It responds to regular care. Vitamin C fits beautifully into that broader truth. What matters most is not chasing intensity, but maintaining continuity. That is also why the story of deficiency earlier felt gradual. If the body depends on regular intake, then low intake over time does not always produce instant collapse. Instead, it slowly reduces the support available for ordinary maintenance. The dimming happens because the usual flow has been interrupted. And by the same logic, meeting the body's needs is often less about a single dramatic intervention and more about restoring a stable pattern. Vitamin C, in that sense, behaves like many quiet necessities in life. Sleep is like that. Water is like that. Rest is like that. The body often thrives not on occasional extremes, but on repeated sufficiency. Enough arriving often enough. Not too little for too long. Not a philosophy of excess, just continuity. And perhaps that is one of the reasons vitamin C remains such a soothing subject to think about. It brings us back to ordinary rhythms, meals, habits, the calm repetition of eating across days and seasons. The body does not need endless amounts to be impressed. It needs steady support to keep doing its work. Still, life is rarely perfectly even. Bodies change, needs shift. Growth, healing, strain, and illness can alter how the body uses its resources. A nutrient that is needed steadily may not always be needed in exactly the same way under every condition. So while vitamin C is a nutrient of continuity, it is also part of a living body that never stays entirely still. And that means the next part of the story is not about abandoning steadiness, but about understanding how steadiness meets change. Human beings live under changing conditions. Growth, healing, physical strain, and illness can all alter what the body is asking for behind the scenes. Up to this point, vitamin C has felt steady. It is a nutrient the body seems to want in regular, dependable amounts. That remains true. But steady does not mean identical. The body is alive, and living bodies do not stay in one condition forever. They grow, recover, age, adapt, and pass through periods of greater demand. So while vitamin C is needed across ordinary daily life, the exact context of that need can shift. Growth is one example. A growing body is busy building. New tissue is being formed. Bones lengthen. Skin stretches. Blood vessels expand with the rest of the body. Countless repairs and adjustments happen as development continues. Since vitamin C helps support collagen and tissue maintenance, it makes sense that growth places importance on having enough of it available. The body is not simply preserving what already exists. It is actively building forward. Healing is another clear example. When the body is recovering from injury or strain, it has more repair work to do than usual. Tissues need rebuilding. Small damage must be cleaned up and replaced. Normal structure must be restored. That does not make vitamin C a magical answer to every problem, but it does place it in a meaningful position. A body doing extra repair work is drawing more attention toward the nutrients that help support that work. Physical strain can fit into this picture as well. Life is not always soft and even. There are periods of effort, exertion, and wear. Muscles work harder. Tissues absorb more pressure. Recovery becomes more important. The body remains capable and adaptable, of course, but it is still moving through changing demands. In times like these, nutrition becomes part of the body's ability to keep up with itself. Illness can also change the atmosphere inside the body. When the body is unwell, many systems become more active. Immune responses shift. Rest becomes more necessary. Appetite may change. Energy may be redirected. During these times, people often become more aware of nutrition in general, not because one nutrient suddenly controls everything, but because the body's ordinary balance feels more fragile and more important. Vitamin C belongs inside that broader pattern. Its role does not suddenly become magical during growth, healing, strain, or illness. It remains the same vitamin, carrying out the same basic kinds of functions. What changes is the context around it. A body under new demands may feel the importance of supportive nutrition more clearly because more work is being done, or because recovery matters more than usual. That is an important distinction. It keeps the conversation grounded. Vitamin C is not transformed into something mystical when life becomes difficult. It simply becomes easier to see that nutrients matter most clearly when the body is being asked to do more than its quiet baseline work. This is true of many things in life. A house may seem perfectly strong in calm weather and only reveal its weak points in a storm. A bridge may seem effortless when little traffic passes over it and only show strain under heavier loads. The human body is not so different. When life becomes more demanding, the importance of everyday support often comes into clearer view. And vitamin C is one of those supports. It helps remind us that the body is not static. Nutritional needs are not ideas carved into stone, exactly the same under every condition. They live inside a changing system. A growing child, a person recovering from injury, someone going through illness, someone under physical strain, each may bring a different rhythm to the body's use of resources. That does not mean the core lesson changes. The core lesson is still one of steady nourishment, regular intake, and ordinary support. The difference is that ordinary support must meet a body that itself is never entirely ordinary from one moment to the next. Needs rise and fall. Context changes. Life moves. There is something gentle in recognizing that. It allows nutrition to feel less like a fixed rulebook and more like part of the body's conversation with the world. The body responds to what is happening around it and within it. Food becomes one of the ways it keeps up with that changing reality. And perhaps that helps explain something about the modern world too. Vitamin C appears not only in fruits, vegetables, and home kitchens, but in bottles, powders, tablets, packets, and shelves filled with products promising convenience. A nutrient tied so closely to ordinary food has also become something packaged, measured, and sold in many different forms. At some point, vitamin C stepped beyond food and entered packaging. Once that happened, it became not just something people ate, but something they could buy in measured forms. That shift says a great deal about the modern world. For most of human history, vitamin C came hidden inside living foods. It arrived in fruit, greens, roots, leaves, and other parts of plants without asking for special attention. People did not hold a tablet in one hand and compare it to a meal in the other. The nutrient was simply part of food, woven into flavor, color, texture, and season. But over time, modern industry learned how to isolate many nutrients, separate them from their natural settings, and place them into bottles, packets, powders, and chewable tablets. Vitamin C became one of the most recognizable examples of that change. Now it appears in many forms: small tablets, fizzy drink powders, capsules, chewables with bright flavors, packets stirred into water, effervescent tablets dropped into a glass. Even before reading a label, a person can often recognize the idea behind the product. It is vitamin C removed from the orange, the pepper, the kiwi, the broccoli, and made portable in another way. There is something practical about that. Modern life values convenience. Food is not always prepared carefully. Meals are not always varied. People travel, rush, forget, simplify, and look for easy solutions. Packaged nutrients fit neatly into that kind of world. A tablet can sit on a shelf for months. A powder can travel in a bag. A chewable can be taken quickly without washing fruit or chopping vegetables. In that sense, supplements reflect the rhythms of modern living as much as they reflect anything about vitamin C itself. At the same time, packaging changes the feeling of the nutrient. When vitamin C comes in an orange, it feels like food. When it comes in a bottle, it can begin to feel more medical, more technical, or more commercial. The molecule itself may still be vitamin C, but its meaning changes in the imagination. It no longer arrives wrapped in sweetness, fiber, or the scent of fresh peel. It arrives as a product, something chosen from a shelf and taken with intention. That difference is worth noticing. Food carries vitamin C as part of a larger whole. A fruit or vegetable is not only a vitamin delivery system, it also contains water, texture, aroma, and other compounds that belong to the plant's life. A supplement isolates one part of that larger picture. It offers concentration and convenience, but it removes the nutrient from its original setting. Neither of those forms is mysterious, but they are not quite the same experience. This is one reason vitamin C can feel almost like two different things in the modern mind. On one side, it is a food story. Oranges, berries, peppers, greens, and fresh meals. On the other side, it is a product story. Bottles lined up under bright store lights, powders stirred into drinks, tablets swallowed as part of a routine. The nutrient has crossed from the garden and the kitchen into the world of packaging, branding, and shelf life. And once a nutrient enters that world, human thinking often changes with it. Food usually invites patience. It is washed, prepared, cooked, shared, and eaten. A packaged supplement invites efficiency. It is measured, taken, and completed. Food is often part of a meal. A supplement is often treated as a task. That difference may seem small, but it changes the emotional place the nutrient occupies in daily life. There is also something revealing in how common these products have become. Their popularity suggests that many people want control over nutrition in a direct and visible form. Instead of trusting food alone, they prefer something counted, labeled, and exact. A tablet feels measurable. A packet feels certain. It offers a sense of order in a complicated world. And yet vitamin C itself remains the same quiet molecule it always was. It still supports the body in the same basic ways. It still dissolves, travels, and is used in ordinary chemistry. It still does not become magical simply because it is sold separately. The bright packaging of the modern world can make nutrients seem louder than they really are. But beneath the label, vitamin C remains a modest participant in the background work of living tissue. That is perhaps the calmest way to see it. Supplements, powders, and tablets are part of the story of vitamin C now, because they reflect how modern life likes to organize health. But the nutrient's deeper identity was formed long before bottles and packets existed. It was formed in plants, in meals, in history, and in the body's quiet need for steady support. And once vitamin C has been separated from food and offered in concentrated forms, a familiar human question almost always follows. If some is useful, would more be even better? That question follows almost every nutrient sooner or later. And with vitamin C, the answer brings us back once again to its water-soluble nature and the body's preference for balance. There is something very human about the idea that more might be better. If a nutrient is useful, then surely a much larger amount must be even more useful. If a little support is good, then a flood of support might seem even wiser. This kind of thinking is easy to understand. It feels simple. It feels direct. But the body does not always reward that logic. Very often, the body is not asking for endless amounts. It is asking for enough. Vitamin C is a good example of that. Because vitamin C is water-soluble, it does not behave like a nutrient the body can store in great deep reserves for a very long time. It moves through the watery systems of the body, is used where needed, and when intake rises beyond what the body can manage or use at the moment, some of the extra is generally excreted. In that sense, the body places limits on how much benefit can be drawn from larger and larger amounts. This means that taking more vitamin C does not simply create an endless upward line of value. At some point, the body has what it can reasonably use. Beyond that, extra intake may do little to increase benefit in ordinary situations. The vitamin does not suddenly turn into something more powerful just because the amount becomes larger. It remains the same molecule, doing the same kinds of work within a body that prefers regulation rather than excess. That is the quiet lesson here. Nutrition is often about range, not maximum. The body tends to work best within certain balanced conditions. Too little creates strain. Enough supports normal function. Too much may bring little added value, and in some cases may create its own discomforts. With vitamin C, one of the most commonly discussed effects of very high intake is digestive discomfort. The body can react to large amounts with stomach upset or loose stools. This is not especially mysterious when you think about it. The digestive system is sensitive. It is designed to handle many things, but not always to welcome endless concentrated intake without complaint. When the amount becomes too high, discomfort may be one of the body's ways of signaling that the balance has tipped too far. That does not make vitamin C dangerous in the same way as certain other substances that can build up heavily in the body. Its water-soluble nature does change the picture. But that should not lead to the opposite extreme of imagining it has no limits at all. Water-soluble does not mean infinitely useful. It does not mean the body becomes stronger and stronger with every extra measure. It simply means the body handles vitamin C in a particular way, and part of that handling includes letting go of what is beyond present need. There is something calming in that. The body does not ask us to force endless abundance upon it. It asks for adequacy, for regular support, for enough to keep its quiet maintenance going. That same theme has followed vitamin C through this entire story. Not dramatic stockpiling, not endless excess, just continuity, balance, and steady replenishment. In a way, this returns us to the difference between food and isolated products. Food tends to guide people toward moderation almost without trying. A person may eat an orange, some berries, a serving of vegetables, a bowl of soup. These are ordinary forms of nourishment woven into daily life. Concentrated products can make it easier to drift into a different style of thinking, one focused on quantity for its own sake. But the body itself remains much the same. It still works through rhythms, limits, and quiet acts of regulation. That is why vitamin C is such a useful example of a larger truth. The value of a nutrient does not usually lie in pushing it to an extreme. It lies in meeting the body's needs with enough consistency and care that its background work can continue smoothly. Once that point is reached, more is not always more. Often, more is simply more. And perhaps that is one of the gentlest things nutrition can teach. The body is not impressed by grand gestures as often as people imagine. It is often better served by repeated sufficiency than by dramatic abundance. A calm pattern beats a burst of excess. A steady intake beats a chase for maximums. Still, for all the modern talk about supplements, measurements, and amounts, vitamin C did not begin in bottles or tablets. Long before people isolated it, counted it, or packed it into powders, it existed as part of the living chemistry of plants themselves. And that opens the story outward again, away from products and back toward the natural world, where this small, bright molecule had a life of its own long before human beings gave it a name. Before vitamin C became a human concern, it was already part of plant life. Fruits and leaves were not waiting around to nourish us. They were sustaining themselves first. That is an easy thing to forget. When people talk about nutrients, they often talk as if nature arranged everything for human use. It can start to sound as though oranges exist in order to provide vitamin C, or peppers exist in order to support our tissues, or leafy greens grow mainly to meet our needs. But plants have their own lives, their own chemistry, and their own quiet problems to solve. Vitamin C belonged to that world long before it ever entered ours. Plants make vitamin C for themselves. Inside their cells, it plays important roles in their own living processes. Just as in human cells, plant cells are busy places. They grow, divide, react to light, move water, build structure, and manage the chemistry of being alive. That chemistry creates demands. It creates strain. It creates the need for protection and balance. Vitamin C is one of the compounds plants use as part of that balance. This means vitamin C is not simply a human supplement hidden inside food. It is part of the life of the plant itself. A fruit contains vitamin C because it belongs to the fruit's own biology. A leaf contains it because the leaf is carrying out its own work. The nutrient is present not as a gift prepared with us in mind, but as one part of the plant's internal system of growth and protection. There is something beautiful in that idea. When a person eats a strawberry, a pepper, a kiwi, or a serving of broccoli, they are not only consuming flavor and color, they are borrowing from the chemistry of another living thing. Human nutrition often works this way. We are supported by the compounds that plants make for themselves, compounds that happen to fit into our own biology as well. In this way, the relationship between plants and people is both practical and intimate. Vitamin C helps remind us of that connection. It links our bodies to the green world around us. The same molecule that supports collagen in human tissue also helps plants manage the stresses of their own existence. The details are not identical, of course, because a leaf is not a gum, and a fruit is not a blood vessel. But the larger truth remains. Living things depend on careful chemistry, and vitamin C belongs to that chemistry in more than one kind of life. It also helps explain why fruits and vegetables can be such natural sources of the nutrient. Plants are not storing some foreign substance that only matters once we eat it. They are carrying something already woven into their own structure and activity. A bright red pepper, a leafy green, a citrus fruit. These are not simply containers. They are living tissues shaped by sunlight, water, soil, air, and the inner chemistry of the plant. Vitamin C is one thread within that larger fabric. This gives the story a quieter kind of depth. Instead of thinking only about bottles, labels, and human health language, we can step back and see vitamin C as part of a broader pattern in nature. Plants make it. Animals use it in different ways. Humans depend on getting it from outside themselves. What seems at first like a simple vitamin turns out to be part of a much larger conversation between forms of life. There is also something calming about the fact that plants are not passive in this story. They are active chemical worlds. A fruit ripening on a branch is not a still object. A leaf turning toward light is not just decoration. These are living tissues full of movement and transformation. Vitamin C belongs to that movement. It participates in the plant's own protection and maintenance, just as it later participates in ours. That makes food feel different. A meal stops being only a collection of ingredients and starts to look more like a meeting point between living systems. The plant has already used its own chemistry to grow and survive. Then, when eaten, part of that same chemistry crosses into the human body and becomes part of another life. It is a quiet transfer, so ordinary that it rarely feels mysterious, and yet it is full of wonder when you pause long enough to notice it. Perhaps that is the softest way to understand vitamin C. Not as a product first, not even as a health idea first, but as a natural molecule moving through the world of life. It belongs to plants in their own right. It belongs to the human story only because our bodies learn to depend on what plants were already doing. And once that becomes clear, vitamin C begins to feel less like a special feature of certain foods and more like part of a larger relationship between daily meals and the living world that makes them possible. That relationship becomes easiest to see not in dramatic health claims, but in the ordinary quiet of the kitchen where plant life meets human habit, one meal at a time. By this point, vitamin C no longer feels like a label on a carton. It begins to return to where it lives most quietly, in kitchens, cutting boards, bowls, gardens, and everyday meals. That may be the most comforting part of the whole story. After all the history, chemistry, structure, cells, and questions about deficiency, vitamin C comes back to something simple. It comes back to food. Not only to famous foods, and not only to carefully planned meals, but to the ordinary things people eat every day without much ceremony. A sliced pepper set beside lunch, a few strawberries in a bowl, broccoli on a dinner plate, a potato cooked until soft, a piece of citrus opened by hand. These small moments do not usually feel scientific. No one stands in the kitchen thinking about molecular support for collagen or the chemical balance inside cells while chopping cabbage or rinsing berries. And yet that is exactly where much of the story is taking place. The science does not live apart from daily life. It lives inside it, quietly, almost invisibly. A nutrient can be part of a meal without asking to be admired. That is one reason vitamin C is such a pleasant subject. It belongs to both science and routine. It can be explained in textbooks and measured in laboratories. But it also appears in familiar foods that have been part of human life for generations. There is no sharp line between the grand story and the ordinary one. The grand story is made of ordinary things repeated over time. A person does not need to eat a perfect meal for vitamin C to matter. That is worth remembering. Nutrition can sometimes sound strict, demanding, and exact, as if the body were judging every plate with mathematical precision. But much of real nourishment is gentler than that. It comes from patterns, a variety of foods, repeated chances for the body to receive what it needs. Not every meal must carry the whole burden alone. It is often the rhythm across days that matters most. In that rhythm, vitamin C slips easily into place. It may come in the sweetness of fruit, or the crispness of a vegetable, or the soft warmth of something cooked. It may arrive in foods people celebrate, or in foods they barely notice. That is part of what makes it feel woven into life rather than standing apart from it. It does not always arrive as an event. Often it arrives as background. And perhaps background is where some of the most important things belong. The body itself works mostly in the background. Healing happens in the background. Collagen is built in the background. Cells maintain their balance in the background. So it makes sense that one of the nutrients helping support those processes would also be hidden inside the background of daily meals. There is something almost poetic in that. The things that help hold life together are often not the loudest things. They are not always rare. They are not always expensive or dramatic or newly discovered. Sometimes they are simply present often enough, in enough familiar forms, to keep the quiet systems of the body supplied with what they need. Vitamin C fits that pattern beautifully. It can be famous when people want to talk about it, but it does not need fame in order to matter. A bell pepper does not need a grand reputation. A bowl of fruit does not need to feel profound. A serving of cooked vegetables does not need to be exciting. These foods can simply do what they have always done, becoming part of the ordinary flow between the natural world and the body. That may also be why the story feels restful near its end. We began with brightness, with familiar names and big historical questions. We passed through sea voyages, damaged gums, hidden chemistry, and the body's quiet building work. But now, the subject settles back into the place it was always heading toward. The everyday meal, the plate, the bowl, the small decision to eat what the body can use. A nutrient hidden in ordinary meals is still a remarkable thing. It means that support does not always come in dramatic forms. It means the body's deeper needs can be met through habits so familiar that they almost disappear from notice. It means a kitchen can quietly become part of a much larger story, one that connects plants, history, chemistry, and human life, without needing to say any of it out loud. And perhaps that is the loveliest truth of all. Vitamin C does not only belong to shipwreck stories, scientific terms, or famous fruits. It belongs to the unnoticed kindness of ordinary eating, to meals that seem simple, to foods that show up again and again, to the small, repeated acts that help sustain the body over time. And when a story returns so gently to daily life, it leaves behind one final feeling: that some of the body's steadiest helpers are not the loudest or rarest things in the world, but the quiet ones already resting on the plate. In the end, vitamin C is not remarkable because it is flashy. It is remarkable because something so small, so familiar, and so often taken for granted can support structure, repair, balance, and survival in so many quiet ways. That is what makes it such a gentle subject to rest with. At first, vitamin C can seem almost too ordinary to deserve much attention. Most people know the name. Many connect it with oranges. Some think of juice, some think of fruit, some think of tablets, and some simply think of a healthy thing they have heard about since childhood. But once we stay with the subject long enough, it begins to widen. The familiar name opens into something much larger. It becomes a story about dependence. Human beings cannot make vitamin C for themselves, so we must keep finding it in the world around us. That small fact links us to plants, meals, seasons, and habits of eating in a quiet but constant way. It reminds us that the body is not fully separate from its surroundings. It lives by exchange. It depends on what it can gather, grow, prepare, and eat. It also becomes a story about history. Vitamin C helps shape journeys across oceans. Its absence led to scurvy, one of the great deficiency diseases of the past, and its presence in fresh foods helped change survival at sea. A small molecule hidden in plants became part of exploration, trade, and the movement of human beings across the world. That alone is enough to make the subject feel surprisingly large. Then, beneath the history, there is the body itself. Vitamin C helps support collagen, and with that support comes the strength of skin, gums, blood vessels, and connective tissues. It helps the body maintain some of its hidden framework. It also takes part in the quieter chemistry of cells, helping with balance in places too small to see. It belongs not to one grand dramatic function, but to many small forms of support, each of them easy to miss, yet meaningful over time. Perhaps that is why the story feels so calming near its close. Vitamin C does not ask to be admired. It does not announce its presence with fanfare. When enough is there, much of its work remains invisible. Tissues hold together. Meals do their quiet work. cells continue with their hidden chemistry. The body carries on. In that sense, vitamin C is one of many unnoticed helpers that make ordinary life possible without demanding to be noticed for it. That idea reaches beyond nutrition. So much of life is held together by things that remain in the background. Small acts of care, repeated habits, quiet forms of maintenance. A body depends on these things just as a home depends on little repairs, or a garden depends on steady tending. The loudest part is not always the most important. Often, it is the background that keeps everything else possible. Vitamin C belongs to that background. It is there in fruits and vegetables, in gardens and kitchens, in meals eaten casually, in foods prepared without much thought, in the daily rhythm of eating and being nourished. It may come through sweetness, through bitterness, through crispness, through warmth, through a bowl, a plate, or a glass. However it arrives, it becomes part of the quiet conversation between the body and the living world. And there is something peaceful in ending there. Not with a miracle, not with a grand claim, not with the idea that one nutrient explains everything, but with the softer truth that life is often supported by modest things, received regularly, and woven so deeply into routine that they nearly disappear from notice. Vitamin C is one of those things. A small molecule, a familiar name, a piece of fruit, a green vegetable, a chapter in history, a support for healing, a helper in cells, a sign of how much the body depends on simple, repeated nourishment over time. So tonight, as this story settles into the background, vitamin C can rest there with all the other quiet things that help hold life together. Not loudly, not dramatically, just steadily, faithfully, and almost invisibly, one ordinary day at a time.